So welcome everyone to tonight's presentation, Headwaters Matter, Time to Use Our Heads with Kevin Van Tighem. My name is Amrin Dawn, and this is my partner, Dave Kopacki, and and Lauren Shea is in the background helping things run smoothly this evening. In the spirit of respect, reciprocity, and truth, we honor and acknowledge the land and oral practices of the Treaty 7 nations of the Blackfoot Confederacy, the Siksika, Kainai, Piikani nations, as well as the Nakota and Tsuut'ina nations, on whose traditional lands we are gathered this evening. We also ask that you consider the countless beings with whom we share this beautiful landscape and the web of life that provides us with clean air, water, food, healthy bodies and minds. Experience Journeys is a not-for-profit company with a mission of providing transformative experiences of awareness and connection to the landscapes and natural systems that sustain us. I am a certified nature therapy practitioner, mindfulness and meditation yoga teacher, and Dave is experienced in leading outdoor activities and earth science research. Both Dave and I are registered hiking guides and adventure medics. We've been fortunate to live alongside the Elbow River in beautiful Bragg Creek for over 30 years. Lauren was raised here in Bragg Creek and has a master's in tourism management and an ability to keep us connected to Gens X, Y, and Z in relevant media. Experience Journeys offers nature therapy walks, citizen science, and environmental action projects, and workshops, seminars, and youth education programs.
Learn Your Landscape is a series of expert presentations and discussion sessions on the landscapes and ecosystems of the foothills, mountains, and prairies that cradle our homes. Each session aims to present facts and raise questions regarding our landscapes. Each presentation is followed by question Q&A periods that aim to identify ways we can individually and collectively support and mitigate the issues faced. Proceeds from ticket sales are primarily meant to support environmental organizations of speaker's choice, with a lesser amount covering cost reduction. Learn Your Landscapes was initiated in the fall of 2019 with a 9-event series that enjoyed increasing success until the COVID-19 restrictions forced cancellation of the final 3 presentations in the spring of 2020. However, more than $1,500 was contributed to various NGOs to further environmental action in Alberta. We look forward to a full schedule this year, with one event generally on the second Friday of each month, as well as special guests and topics aside the main schedule. We are lining up some 15 presentations this year on topics as diverse as fungi, birds, and pollinators, to narratives of connection, low carbon energy, and government environmental policy. We hope you will learn with us and protect what we love. So I'm going to introduce Kevin now, who I would say probably doesn't need an introduction to any of you who are here. Kevin Van Tighem was born and raised in Calgary. His family roots in what now is Alberta go back to 1875. He graduated with a degree in plant ecology from the University of Calgary in 1977 and went on to a career with Parks Canada. He has served on the boards of the Nature Conservancy of Canada and the Livingstone Landowners Trust. Kevin is the Journey Prize-winning author of 14 books on wildlife and conservation and writes a regular column, This Land, in Alberta Views magazine. In these days of environmental threats, he is a prolific Facebook influencer to whom many of us look to for making sense and nonsense of government policy. He has the ability to write rich narratives in plain language that illuminate important issues, which call us to action towards sensible conservation goals. His 2017 book, Our Place, Changing the Nature of Alberta, received excellent reviews. One reviewer called these essays challenging, eye-opening, and soul-searching, but deliver an overriding message of hope and possibility. His newest book, Wild Roses Are Worth It, will be released in April this year. This evening, Kevin will explain that although Alberta has made efforts to protect our river headwaters since the 1880s, we've spent the last century and a half degrading these landscapes. And we find ourselves now discussing reopening coal mines in this fragile ecosystem. What went wrong? How can we get it right? Kevin offers some sensible solutions now with his presentation, Headwaters Matter, Time to Use Our Head.
So Kevin has asked us to begin with the following video, and then he'll step in and carry forward with the program.
We think of water as something that comes from a stream, and it does, but it also comes to the stream. And our water security, how clean it is, how bad the spring floods are, how cold and abundant our summer water supply is, depends on how it gets there. This is where our water actually comes from. A strip of forested land and bunchgrass meadows in the lee of the Rocky Mountains. Almost all of Alberta's water originates on the eastern slopes and foothills of the Rocky Mountains. About 80% starts as snow. Most of the rest is from spring rains, and it doesn't come from the streams, it comes from the land. Fitch is a fisheries biologist who for many years was responsible for southern Alberta's trout streams. Before that, he was the southern region's habitat biologist. He spent decades working to keep streams healthy, and that's led him to focus not so much on the streams as the landscapes they drain from.
This logging road built across the slope has intercepted this drainage, whether it's groundwater or surface flow, and instead of allowing that water to flow slowly down slope through the timber to slow it down and be absorbed as shallow groundwater, it's captured this water and now being redirected, and you can see the erosion that's happening because it's running faster than it would through the forest. Behind us is all the silt that's accumulated as a consequence of that capture of the stream.
When a watershed is healthy, it has porous soils and a continuous cover of vegetation. Instead of running off quickly, much of the snow, meltwater, and rain gets trapped in the vegetation and soaks into the soil.
Water that would have run off in a couple weeks on the surface actually can take months, even years, to work its way down slope through the ground. When it comes out, it's been filtered by its exposure to all of this old material. It comes out cold and clean into the streams when we most need water in those streams, summer, fall, winter.
where groundwater emerges into the floodplain of a stream. That's called base flow. That's what keeps creeks and rivers cool and flowing during seasons when there is little or no snowmelt or rainfall. Unhealthy watersheds drain the spring runoff quickly, sending floods of muddy water crashing down streams to places where we live. Healthy watersheds absorb a lot of that water instead and release it weeks or months later. That's important because it's in summer, fall, and winter when streams need the water the most, and it's in summer when we humans use the most water too. Water managers often build dams to store water in reservoirs, but that can do a lot of harm. Dams block fish migrations, and wastewater that are dry foothills winds evaporate into the air. They rearrange river flows so that native plants and animals no longer have natural habitat. The biggest, best, and most important water reservoir in our prairie headwaters is the land itself. Every year, it traps, stores, and releases almost all our water as snowpack and then as runoff and groundwater. The key to a healthy water source is to take care of that reservoir, to make the most of its ability to store water, and to avoid any land use that makes it leak.
Thank you, Dave, and thank you, Marina. Marin. I've got I thought that would be a good video because it would save me a lot of words, but it also introduces another participant in this event, which is the Livingstone Landowners Group. The Livingstone Landowners is an organization of ranchers, acreage owners, property owners in the lower Oldman River Basin who have been amazing over the years at making sure that the best qualities of that landscape are protected against bad plans. And as a result, right now, they're very involved in the controversy over proposed coal mines in the headwaters. And their work involves working with expert witnesses, working with lawyers. It's not inexpensive, and it's certainly not easy for a small grassroots group. So Experience Journeys in hosting this event invites the speakers to, instead of accepting an honorarium, to actually contribute a portion of the revenues from the ticket sales to a charity of their choice. And I chose the Livingstone Landowners because I've got a great deal of respect for the work that they've done over the years. So in this case, it looks like as a result of the good attendance here, there's going to be something like $3,750 going to the Livingstone Landowners to support their work protecting our headwaters. And so I really like to express my appreciation to Experience Journeys and the people that have made this event possible, and the approach you're taking to it. It's a very generous and community-based approach that I think we'll all benefit from. Got a bunch of other people to thank. Most of you are listening. Thank you very much for being here. And there's a whole list of groups that I've written down here, but I think I'm not going to thank them all. I'm just going to say there's an awful lot of people who are focused right now on the health and future of our headwaters. And so I will have one thank you because it sort of brings them all together. I'd like to thank Jason Kenney and his government for uniting us, pulled us together as we've never been pulled together before. We've got ranchers, First Nations people, urban people, rural people, municipal governments, fish and wildlife groups. It's unbelievable, the diversity of people from all parts of the political spectrum who are all pulled together because Jason Kenney and his government has reminded us what we care about the most by putting it under threat. So my thanks to the government. That's the only thing I'm going to thank them for tonight. So this first slide that you've been looking at patiently for the last half hour, waiting for me to move on here, is just to sort of sum up the message of that video. What you're looking at when you look at this photograph is you're looking at the two most important water reservoirs in the province of Alberta. The big one in the background is the snowpack. And as the video pointed out, at least 80% of our water comes to us every winter as snow and is stored in the snowpack. So we think of the snowpack as something that, you know, keeps the voles underneath it warm, gives the skiers, makes the skiers on top of it happy, but it's actually the source of almost all our water. When that snow melts in the spring, when the spring rains come, a lot of that water soaks into the ground. At least if it's a healthy watershed, it soaks into the ground and becomes groundwater. So when you look at this entire landscape, that is the most important water reservoir in the entire province. We can build those little tiny reservoirs that the engineers like to build for us out in the foothills, but nothing holds as much water as our headwaters. If it ain't held here, we aren't going to ever see it. That's not a new insight. The next slide, if you don't mind. I just realized I don't have a clicker here. That's been recognized for a long time. The fellow you see on the right is William Pearce. Ironically, he was the superintendent of mines for the CPR railway belt. He came here in about 1883, about the same time as the railroad. In those days, from Canada, from the young nation of Canada's point of view, we were just a Northwest Territory. We were sort of a hinterland, and so he was probably the most senior bureaucrat in this area. And they got to, he actually got the name the Tsar of the West. It wasn't always given to him in a friendly way. He had immense power over some of the early land use decisions that were made in this area. He was behind the establishment of Banff National Park. He had to sort out the conflict over the Banff hot springs that purportedly railway workers found, but had actually been known for many generations by the First Nations of who saw it as a sacred place. But he got the national park established, and then in 1898 he arranged to have the entire eastern slopes of the Rockies reserved from settlement. There would be no incomers that would be allowed to settle there. There would be no industrial activity there, because he pointed out to his superiors back in Ottawa that the only thing that was going to limit the ability of the West to absorb settlers was going to be the limited supply of water. There just isn't much water here. Our rivers are what they would call creeks in British Columbia or Ontario. And that's as big as they get, and they dry up a lot in the summer. So in the 1911 Department of Interior annual report, this is how they described it: a timbered area lying alongside of a prairie country, hundreds of miles in extent. It forms the watershed for the river systems which water the Great Plains to the east, where water supply is practically the only limit to anticipated settlement and development. Which is why this talk has got a pretty strong water theme. If there's anything that's going to stand in the way of this place and its future, it's going to be lack of water. And if we have a problem with our water supply, it's going to originate in the eastern slopes, because that's where the water comes from. Next slide, please. I've got two slides here, two maps here, and my apologies to those that might have heard me talk the other day. I'm going to be covering the same ground on a couple of the for part of this talk. If you look at the map on your left, you'll see purple and blue along the left and up into the Swan Hills area. south of Grand Prairie and Slave Lake. If you look where we all live, it's pale green, yellow, orange. And what that's telling you is those are maps of the average annual precipitation. There's up to 3 times as much precipitation, rain and snow, that fall along the Continental Divide as they get in Medicine Hat. Most of us live in the part of the province that uses water. We don't generate water, we use it. The part of the province that generates water is that purple and blue that you see. The eastern slopes that trap all the winter snows and the spring rains, and are fortuitously at a high enough elevation that they're actually cool, and so the water doesn't evaporate too fast. And that's where our water comes from. If you look on the right-hand side, you'll see a map that shows white areas and green areas. The white areas are private land, private property. Over the last century and a half, that's sort of been their trajectories into private ownership. But because of the foresight of William Pearce and those that came after him, the green areas are forest reserve. And those are areas that are held in public land because of their critical importance in providing us with water, and also because of their value for other consumptive uses of what we call natural resources, and what nature calls ecosystems. So the point in showing these is that even back in the 1890s, when there was not much known about the West in terms of the people that were making decisions about it out in the East, and when the West was very lightly populated because the First Nations people had been decimated by disease and the Europeans had barely started to arrive here, even back then, it was recognized that our eastern slopes are vitally important to the future of this countryside because of their importance in producing water. And because of the policy actions taken back then, they still serve that purpose. Can I see the next slide? Well, they don't just produce water, these eastern slopes. Because of the fact that they were held as public land in the public trust, and because of the fact that to protect their water, you need to protect their vegetation and landscapes, they have continued to provide to Albertans all sorts of other benefits, from habitat for rare and endangered species like the grizzly bear and the bull trout, recreational opportunities, scenic beauty, a whole range of things that make life in Alberta worth living. Most of us, at one point or another, find ourselves resorting to the eastern slopes to camp, to hunt, to fish, to hike, to do all the things that make it worth waking up in the morning and remembering where you live. And all of those things are possible because, first of all, because there's good water courses coming out of those little drainages that provide some of the best habitat either in the water or beside it, and because the landscape is being kept intact. So I'm going to pause here for a minute. One of the points I used to make in talks before we got obsessed with coal in this province is that if you were planning for the future of this province and you were thinking about this band of public lands, and you were saying strategically, what do we need to ensure that we have the best economy, we have the best quality of life into the future, a future of uncertainty, a future of climate change, a future of increasing competition for resources and for all the things that make the future an uncertain and sometimes scary place. I would argue certainly water, because we're a water scarce region. All of our water is already allocated in the South Saskatchewan Basin. There's nothing left to give away except for a small amount in upstream from the Old Man Reservoir, which our government is currently trying to give to the coal companies. We're going to run out of water before we run out of anything else, and everything runs on water. So watershed protection should be an important value in public land. Another one would be biological diversity, biodiversity conservation. We need to be able to tell the world, since we're energy salespeople, at least for the near future, that we actually take care of nature. We need success stories. We need to be able to tell them about something other than, black tarred up ducks in settling ponds in the oil sands. The other thing that we need is places of exceptional quality for outdoor recreation, because capital and labor are very mobile in the 21st century.
people move their businesses to the places where they can attract the best employees and retain the best employees. And that means places that haven't ruined their scenery and have not ruined their natural settings. Because when work's over, people want to play and people want to recharge their batteries, and they look around for beauty and they look around for challenge. So those three things are what the wisdom of our forebears has given us in the Eastern Slopes. Water conservation, biodiversity conservation, and exceptional outdoor recreation environments. Brilliant, because those are what our future will rely on. If we want to have an economic future and a place worth living in, those are going to be critical. So we've had pretty enlightened governments leading up to where we are today. Can I have the next slide? Next slide. There we go. Slow loading. But I'm going to spend a little bit of time on water because I'm going to, inevitably, what we are talking about right now, the crisis that we're facing is the incredibly dunderheaded decision of our current government to open up our Eastern Slopes to coal. I just want to pause briefly, and while you stare at this beautiful clean water that currently comes out of, in this case, the Livingstone River, which has now all been leased for coal mining, and think about what coal mining does. And I will probably come back to this later on because of how I arranged these slides. But when you think about what that video showed you, the key pieces of a healthy watershed are intact vegetation, porous soils filled with the roots of that intact vegetation, and then subsurface shattered up gravel and boulders, the stuff that the glaciers left, in an intact landscape, because the water has to be trapped as snow, released slowly by snow melt, absorbed by the soil, turned into groundwater, and sustain these streams through the seasons as it comes up into the streams, either from tributary streams or up from the ground as base flow. When you strip mine a landscape, you kill the vegetation first. There goes your snow holding capacity. You scrape off the vegetation. There goes your ability to create groundwater. Now the water is going to run off over top. And then you grind up all the rocks, tear them off and grind them up, which now means that you've ruined the plumbing that sits underneath all of the system. And the rivers are no longer going to be getting that base flow. They're going to be getting overland flow coming off eroded landscapes full of silt and actually full of toxins that come out of the weathered rock. So what I'm describing is not what you're seeing. What you're seeing is what wisdom has given us, but what dunderheaded policy decisions made in the last 12 months are promising the future is that what this will look like will be a much smaller river in midsummer, a much dirtier river in the spring, and it'll be polluted, and it will have less water in it than over the course of the year than it does now, because so much water gets used by coal mining. That's the cheery story. Can I have the next slide? But I want to step back a bit, because the issue of the day is coal. But the truth is, we've lost a lot of the vision of those early people that set aside our headwater forests to protect our water supplies. It sort of goes back to, well, mostly, I guess, since Ralph Klein's era. So in the last 20 or 30 years, there's been a real move towards seeing the Eastern Slopes as just a source of exportable resources, of things that we can harvest and sell. And so one of the things that we've seen is the allocation of almost all the forests to timber harvest. And so even without coal, we've already got problems here. And the problems involve the fact that we do forest harvest in the Eastern Slopes mostly by clear cutting. And clear cutting, again, removes the vegetation, messes up the soil, diverts that groundwater into surface water, and starts to degrade our rivers and streams and undermine our water security. So we're already doing that. That's one set of impacts that we've already laid on the landscape. Next slide. Oh, you skipped one. Oh, there we go. Another thing, and I'm not going to belabor this too much because I spent previous years doing that, but another thing is that we in our pursuit of wealth and prosperity during the oil boom era, we really developed a culture with a strong attitude of entitlement. And at the same time, we also created a society where people could afford toys. And because we had lost sight, because governments had lost sight of the policy priorities for our eastern slopes as being water, they started to become just a place where we sent people out to play without really providing them with anything in terms of proper facilities or proper education to help them do it right. And so one of the other problems that we've got now is, in addition to logging, we've got all these motorized activities that take place in places where they shouldn't. And again, motorized activities strip off vegetation, compact the soil, diverts precipitation into surface water, and send silt to the rivers. So we got two sets of things happening now. Aggressive logging, aggressive recreation. Next slide. And of course, the new kid on the block, coal mining. It's not really a new kid on the block. We used to have coal mines. We still have a couple up near Hinton and Grand Cache. But it's always been very limited extent in the eastern slopes, because when the Lougheed government came in the late 1970s, they came in as a pretty enlightened bunch of people. They had a vision. They were young. They were ambitious. They were full of sort of progressive ideas, and they thought, you know, we are going to get it right. We're gonna change the trajectory this province is on. We got lots of money coming in from the oil patch, so we can afford to do the right things. So let's take the time to figure it out. And one of the things they did was they put together an Eastern Slopes policy that said that there are areas in the Eastern Slopes that are primarily for wildlife, for scenic beauty, and there are other areas in the Eastern Slopes that probably can handle a few other kinds of uses and activities. So we have an Eastern Slopes policy, and at the same time, they developed a coal policy. And the coal policy took them a number of years, because the background noise to this is that they did an inventory of the entire landscape, and they said, you know, where are all the valuable things that society values? Where's the best timber? Where's the best fish and wildlife? Where are the environmentally sensitive areas? Where are the mineral resources? And then they laid those things all together, and they said, okay, then, based on this, we're going to come up with 4 categories of land related to coal. And they will cover the whole area of the province that has coal. In category 1, we're not going to have any coal mining, because that's already national parks and provincial parks and things that are out of bounds and will always be out of bounds, hopefully. Category 2, they said, well, some of these places are pretty remote. Some of them don't have a lot of infrastructure. And many of them have got very important environmental attributes. And again, they were looking at things like fish and wildlife habitat and watershed values. In those areas, they said, well, you know, I guess we can lease the coal. We can lease the land out, but we're gonna let people know right up front, they're not gonna strip mine it. If they can go out, we might allow them to explore for coal, but if they come back to us with a mining proposal, it's pretty much gonna have to be underground or nothing, because it's just too sensitive to be stripped. Zone 3, again, not quite as critically important, usually more accessible, more further to the east. But again, they said strip mining, if you propose to do strip mining, there's going to be real restraints on you, but you know, we'll consider it. And Zone 4 was areas that had already had coal mining and were already sort of identified as coal lands. So they did that, and it was smart. It was brilliant policy. It said, okay, we're going to take the intrinsic attributes of this landscape. We're going to figure out where we can afford to take a chance on coal and where we can't. And we'll have coal industry, but we'll also have environmental protection. It was ahead of its time. Its time is now. And last year, the United Conservative Party of Alberta arbitrarily struck it off the books. They didn't do any homework. They didn't consult with anybody. They certainly didn't consult with First Nations. They didn't consult with anybody else. They just got rid of it because they talked to some coal miners that wanted in there. And then immediately, as soon as that happened, a lot of companies had staked claims on this land, in you know, just because I might as well put my mark on it before somebody else gets there. All those coal, I forget what they're called now, and it's not going to come back to me because as soon as I try to remember something like that, it panics me. But anyway, the coal agreements became coal leases. The companies all applied for and got leases. And so they leased the entire Eastern Slopes, pretty much, not the entire Eastern Slopes, but tens of thousands of square kilometers suddenly became leased for coal that had always been out of bounds for strip mining, because suddenly, without the coal policy there, the companies were going to be able to strip mine them. Well, now the coal policy is back because we all made a fuss. But it's not really back because the leases were let in the interim. And so even though the coal policy is back, those leases are new. They weren't there before. And the exploration permits are still in place, and we will hear the bulldozers in our headwaters this summer. And we'll smell them and we'll hear them, and we'll see the runoff coming off the slopes. And in addition, the way that they brought it back was with a little wink and a nudge to the regulators saying, well, don't let them talk the tops off any mountains. But you know, there's a slight sort of exception possible for other kinds of strip mining. So keep that in mind when you're hearing from the coal companies. So the bottom line is we now have logging that is being done in an unsustainable manner if you're trying to sustain water. Recreation, which is historically been very poorly managed, is some parts of it are getting better, but some parts of it are still a mess. And we're going to be looking at strip mining all through that whole landscape. I would expect that William Pearce is rolling in his grave right now, shaking his head saying, what is wrong with those people, the younger generation? Could I get the next slide? So this is a sign that you won't find anywhere because I invented it, but I'd sure love to see it. And I'm thinking that, you know, we are at an interesting and challenging and in some ways very inspiring time in Alberta's history, because for everything that I've just, to the extent that I've described kind of a cascading mess of bad resource management decisions being overlaid on a landscape that was always intended to be protected and kept intact for water protection. For all that I've described, that last issue that came in, the coal mining issue, has suddenly wakened everybody up to the fact that, you know, we can't take things for granted anymore. And we can't trust governments to have any common sense or respect for us. And it's mobilized a movement in this problem like we've seen before. Like it absolutely a historical moment in the history of this province. We've wakened up to who we are. We realized my internet connection is unstable. Are you hearing me okay? Somebody nod. I'm going to assume that we're okay. Thanks. So we've been waking up to who we are. We've realized that who we are is where we are. And we realize that we cannot take where we are for granted anymore. We need to keep an eye on our governments. We can't just elect them and then walk away and trust them to take care of things. That doesn't work. And so I don't think we're going to ever go back from where we are today, which is a highly motivated, highly engaged, highly attentive Alberta population. And that is really good. And that's why I said thank you to Jason Kenney. I mean, he never intended to do this, but it's the one good thing I've seen him do. Not that I'm being partisan here. And so what I'd like to end with is just the idea that maybe this is our time. We've still got to fight to save to save the eastern slopes from coal mining. That's not over yet. But let's not stop there. Let's not go from issue to issue and reaction to reaction. Let's remind ourselves of where we came from. Let's remind ourselves of what we're all about. And let's start by striking the word forest reserve from our vocabulary and replacing it with Headwaters Conservation Reserve, and start treating our headwaters the way they are always meant to be treated. Let's review forest policy. Let's review recreation policy. Let's review transportation policy. Let's review coal and mineral leasing. And let's put them in the context of, yeah, all of those things are possibly acceptable, probably acceptable to some degree, if they maintain or improve the health of our headwaters, the health of these landscapes, so that they give us good, sustainable supplies of clean, year-round water in trout streams that flow out of beautiful landscapes that we can all resort to and enjoy. We can take a crisis and turn it into an opportunity if we're ready to. But it will require citizen action, because this is not the sort of thing that governments are likely to do. Not the kind of thing that this government's likely to do. It's the sorts of things that governments are there to do when their citizens push them in the right direction. And we have now got the critical mass that we can actually do that. So that's the note I wanted to end on. We are in a perilous time right now in this province. We're coping with some really bad decisions, and you know, we're fighting to head their consequences off. But we are also in a very good time, because we've all discovered each other, and we've all discovered our place, and we've all discovered that there are things that matter that are worth fighting for, and we're fighting for it. And that can only be good if we stay at it and we continue to work together and stay engaged. So I think that was my last slide. There might be one more. Probably not. If so, I guess I'd just like to wind up by once again thanking, oh, there we go. I knew there was another slide. I got some thanks, Dave and Amron from Experienced Journeys, the Livingstone Landowners groups, and all those wild valleys. Don't forget, this is our home place. Our home is not where we live. It's not the house. And our family is not the people that live in the house with us. Those wild green valleys are part of our home, and the things that live there are part of our family too. And we should be grateful to all of them. I've offered a couple of links here, and I'm assuming that this will in some way be available afterwards. But if you want to learn more from those, like there's a whole family of those water videos that we put together with the Livingstone Landowners. They're available online. They're all on YouTube, on the Livingstone Landowner Group's YouTube channel. And my youngest son and I collaborated on a book a couple of years ago, Heart's Waters, Sources of the Bow River, which goes into much greater depth with much less stumbling over the words than the talk did tonight. So thank you very much for listening. I wish I could see your faces, but with this many faces, it probably wouldn't do much good anyway. And I'm now more than happy to answer any questions.
Hey, thanks very much, Kevin. I thought the talk was great. What we'd like to do is we'd like to take a few minutes if people need to go get rid of some water or pick up some fermented water or something like that. Why don't we take a few minutes and come back at 7:54? Why don't we come back at 8 o'clock and start in on questions and answers? Lauren has been monitoring the chat questions, and she will lead us on some questions that many of you may have asked and are similar. So that's what we'll start off. Okay, so we'll see you back here in 6 minutes. Thank you very much.
In front of me here, and it's vanished. I was asked to provide a clarification on what the differences are between mountain removal, open pit, strip, and surface mining. And yeah, if you want to baffle people, just invent a lot of words. The bottom line is any way in which you get coal without digging a hole in the mountain and pulling it out from underground is called surface mining. And there are a number of kinds of surface mining. One of them is taking the top off a mountain and just sort of throwing the rubble over the edge and working your way down through coal deposits if it's along the top of a ridge. Another one is to dig an open pit and then mine the edges of the pit, you know, dig down through the coal layers and then mine the edges of the pit. And there's other forms, strip mining, things like that. So there are various versions of surface mining, and they are not all the same. So the semantical game that the province of Alberta is playing with us right now is that we've been earnestly assured that all is well, there will be no mountaintop removal mining in the eastern slopes. Mountaintop removal is not an issue, or is not the only issue. It's one way in which you can get coal if the coal happens to be near the top of the mountain. But you can do surface mining on the side of a mountain, at the base of the mountain. You can dig out the bottom of a valley. What we don't want is surface mining, because it's surface mining of any sort that causes problems with water quality and with water processes, and that wipes out wildlife habitat and makes things ugly. It's surface mining is the problem. All the other terms are just kinds of surface mining. And that's the little semantical game that the government has played with us. They're earnestly assuring you that all is well. They've banned mountaintop removal mining again. And it was never about mountaintop removal mining. It was about surface mining. And that is still an option that they're prepared to consider. I think there was another, I guess I scrolled down to find these questions, eh? Another question I found was, what are the specific actions that I would recommend for average citizens who care? You know, we all have different talents. We all have different comfort levels. We all are more or less confident in our knowledge. And so it's kind of hard to answer that one. At this point, there's a lot of people doing a lot of creative things. People are putting up signs. People are, I saw a whole bunch of Valentine's cards that were kind of, you know, sarcastic Valentine cards that are going out on social media. You know, a ton of us are on Facebook and other social media platforms. Letter writing like crazy, petitions, several petitions have been circulated. All those things are good because what we're trying to do is we're trying to clog up the airwaves with this issue until the government finally stops playing games with us and actually listens to us. At this point in time, I think it's important that we renew our letter writing to our provincial politicians, because they need to hear that they didn't fool us and that we're not happy yet. As long as there's a potential for surface mining on our eastern slopes, they aren't listening. Because if there's one thing I've heard universally, that's what we don't want, with a few exceptions, and that's mostly people that are hoping to get jobs in coal mines. But the vast majority of us just don't want to see strip mining, surface mining on our eastern slopes. So we need to let our politicians know that, try again, guys. You didn't fool us. We're still waiting to see some real action here. Another thing, there's the Niitsitapi water protectors. It's a group based in the Kenai Reserve down near Standoff there. Has just recently launched a petition to the federal government asking for cumulative effects assessment of coal mining. And the Niitsitapi are framing that around Aboriginal rights and the duty to consult. And they have a very powerful argument. I think we really all need to make sure that we find their petition and sign it. And it's available on Facebook, and it's available on my feed as a public post if you can't find it anywhere else. There's a couple of things. You could go for a picnic on June 1st. A bunch of us are going to be doing that down in the Old Man River Basin. And again, the information like that about that is online. But I would say correspondence to provincial politicians, correspondence to the federal environment minister, sign that petition, put up signs if you can if you can. But we need to keep this in the public eye. That's the main thing we need to do. We just need to keep this active. If we aren't going away, eventually, it's going to look politically threatening to the government. As soon as they feel politically threatened, they'll pay attention. We're not quite close enough to an election for them to feel really worried, but let's take it there.
Those are all great points, Kevin. And we just want everyone to know that we'll send out in an email, you know, any of these links to the petitions and everything that we can gather. And kind of summarize what Kevin has shared. It's a big piece of, you know, what we want everyone to walk out of here is feeling, you know, empowered, like we can do something together. So just make sure you follow us as well, and we'll be posting as much as we can. So we'll let you take the next question there, Kevin.
Great, thanks, Amarin. The next question I got is, could you please mention how selenium gets into the water, basically? Selenium has been covered a lot recently. It's one of the real issues that's really concentrating a lot of people's minds, because when you crush up all that rock, when you think about it, the rock has been underground for millennia, like for millions of years, and it's been stable. And when water goes into the ground and goes through groundwater, it's not flowing through that rock that much. It's flowing through, it's flowing above the rock for the most part, and it's flowing through cracks between the rocks, but the rock is intact. When you mine it, you crush it all up. They grind it all up and they expose it to the elements. Well, rock is a composite of a bunch of minerals, and some of those minerals are toxic. You know, the rocks that you find, the shale and the coal, have got things like arsenic and selenium and And of course, when they're blowing them up, they're using explosives, so you get nitrates released and spread all over the rocks from the explosives. And of course, once it's exposed to the elements, it's still going to rain, it's still going to snow, so all that stuff is soluble and it ends up in the runoff water and it goes into our creeks. Selenium's a real problem because there's a generous supply of it in our coal rocks in this region. And over on the BC side of the Continental Divide, where they've been coal mining, strip mining for a lot longer than and to a much greater extent than we have here, their selenium problem, the pollution from selenium going into the river, is so bad that the Americans are complaining about it. Hundreds of kilometers downstream, the elevations, the selenium levels are higher than the safe level in American reservoirs. That's how much selenium is released, and that's how far it travels. In fact, I think it was last year. Well, the company was busy trying to improve its performance in selenium. They turned around and looked for their trout and realized that they'd lost over 90% of the West Slope cutthroat trout in the Fording River. They were gone. They died to selenium poisoning. It's highly toxic to fish. So on our side of the divide, we're going to get selenium from two sources. We're going to get selenium from runoff as the dissolved material in the runoff from the mines. And we're going to get it from dust blowing off the surface of the mines, because we're on the windy side of the hill. And we get incredible winds in the Old Man Basin and actually all the way up the eastern slopes that will be picking up this ground up pulverized dust and putting it up into the air and blowing it for hundreds of kilometers, or tens of hundreds of kilometers. And the dust is the stuff that's full of the contamination. So we're going to be getting it in our streams, and we'll be getting it from the air when it rains, when this stuff settles as dust and then it gets rained on. How bad will it get? It's hard to say. It won't be bad when the first mine goes in. It'll be baddish when the second mine goes in. But if all these leases are developed, we're going to have a massive problem with selenium. And once it's mobilized, once that ground is rocked, that rock is ground up, it's not going away for centuries. So right now, if you want to deal with selenium solution, there's a really easy, if you want to deal with selenium pollution, there's a really easy solution. Don't mine coal. Leave it in underground in that rock, and it won't come out and bother us. My scrolling, I'm just scrolling through the comments to find more questions. Oh, that's an interesting one. Somebody's asked about the Government of Alberta's Code of Practice for Wetland Replacement Works. Another example of mealy-mouthed policy developed actually by a previous government, but it continues to play now. And what it does is it says you should try to avoid disturbing natural wetlands, but if you do disturb them, you can replace them somewhere else. And the question is, does this bear on this coal mining issue, and does it entitle developers to manage landscapes for their own gains? Well, any wetland replacement has to be approved. Of course, to be approved, you have to have staff, and the government's laying off a lot of these people that do these approvals and reviews. But it's not carte blanche for a developer to go and mess things up. You need to go through a process of getting approval to do it. And the first part of the process is proving that you have no choice but to disturb the wetlands. So I don't think it really bears on the coal mining issue and on many of these things happening on the public lands. And I guess the problem with trying to focus on the wetland part of the landscape is that, strictly speaking, if you're thinking about groundwater recharge and the source of all of our water, that whole landscape's a wetland. In the spring, when the snow is melting and the rain is falling, it's all wet, and it's all important. And so to that extent, and certainly from a policy point of view, that's not how the government looks at it. But from a protection point of view, that's how we need to think about it. We need to protect that whole landscape as a source of our water, because while it might be very brief, the period of time that it's saturated, that period of time is what puts the water into the ground and keeps our rivers alive. Another question. Yeah, I knew it was going to be about coal, right? What has changed this week? How many mining leases and explorations are now ongoing? I have trouble keeping track of this too. As I understand it, and I'm just telling you my understanding, and I may or may not be 100% right here. There's a Grassy Mountain coal mine proposal, which is currently under review by the federal and provincial governments. It's a separate sort of thing. It's been in the works for a number of years. It goes back to the progressive conservative government, through the NDP government, to the current government. It's in the process. It's being treated properly. It's a terrible project, but it's being examined in a proper way through the appropriate process. There's another that's down in the Crow's Nest Pass area. Then there's Tent Mountain. They just, I think as of today, published terms of reference for an environmental review. They're gearing up to open up Tent Mountain as a new mine. It was also like Grassy Mountain. It used to be a mine, and they want to reopen it. So there's two mine proposals that are quite advanced and are immediate threats. They weren't really affected by anything the government did, because they were consistent with the coal policy all the way along. It's just the problem is that they are coal strip mines, and we shouldn't have them. There were 11 leases, I believe, issued last winter. The government revoked those in their first attempt to placate us. They were little tiny leases, but there was most of the area around the Ram River, around the Bighorn River, and in the Oldman River Basin was reserved by mining companies prior to the coal policy being canceled last spring. And when the coal policy was canceled, they promptly turned those into leases. And so I believe there's 6 big leases that are still in place, covering big chunks of the eastern slopes. And they're still planning to explore them. And the government has said they can still get exploration permits, which means that the process towards them becoming mine proposals is still underway. So that's what my understanding is.
Hey, Kevin, somebody, Emil Curry asked about saying, could you please speak to MLA for Livingston McLeod, Roger Reed's pronouncement that, quote, we are underutilizing the allocation in the Old Man watershed, that we are using only 16% of our water supply, end quote. And that he is just looking at, quote, at opportunities to diversify our economy, unquote, by finding uses for, quote, unused water.
This is, I'm going to try and talk slower here to explain this one, because it's a bit complicated. We are not utilizing the Old Man watershed. It is actually over allocated. We are using massive amounts of water in the Old Man watershed, mostly for irrigation agriculture. And that's the reason that the Old Man River Dam was built in the 1980s. It was to manage the flow of the Old Man River downstream so that they could squeeze as much water out of that system as possible, primarily for irrigation farming. When that dam was built, of course, it was very controversial, and lots of debates over whether it was really in the public interest. And so one of the things the government of the day did was they reserved a portion of the water that they felt the dam would make available. And they said that will be held back for irrigation expansion and a small amount for industry upstream from the dam. So we're going to say that there's some water available for you upstream from the dam. That's the water Roger Reed is talking about. A lot of irrigation development hasn't happened yet. So there's a holdback of water, notional holdback of water upstream from the Old Man Dam, which is not being used yet. And the government is proposing to make that all available for industry. And in fact, it would all go to coal mines. Because what they realized when they started talking to these coal companies was that there's no water available. The water is already allocated. The only water available was this little reserve, and they want to give it to the coal mines. Now, the problem with Roger Reed's statement, which is a very uninformed statement, but perhaps deliberately uninformed to try and misinform us, is that there is no water in the Old Man Basin that is not being utilized. It's being utilized by ecosystems. Every little drop of that water is keeping trout alive, is keeping floodplain vegetation alive, is being drank by elk and deer and bears, fed in by dippers. It's all being used. The notion that it's available for us use is for our use is just something that we invented. And nobody's ever done an analysis of how much water is actually needed in those little headwater streams, because that's where the coal mining water will come from. It won't come from the reservoir, it won't come from the rivers, it'll come from those little trout streams. and they're gonna be suffering because those trout streams already shrink to almost nothing in the middle of the summer and in some winters. There's no water to spare up there. We might say we're underutilizing the allocation, but that's only because we've misallocated the water. And in any case, giving it all to the coal mines is a tacit admission of the fact that we have no idea, no vision for the future economy of southwestern Alberta except coal. There'll be no other industrial need for water. There'll be no towns expanding and needing more water. There's no, in spite of climate change, there's going to be no dryland farmers switching to irrigation because we're saying that they don't need any water. There's no water for them. There will be no water for the future except for coal if we go ahead with what the province of Alberta is doing and what Roger Reid is promoting.
Thanks, Kevin. There's another question here that's come through in a couple different ways. Is the land that has been leased quote unquote done deal? Is there anything that can be done to quote unquote unlease the lands, for want of better words to describe a retroaction of this kind?
Once a lease has been awarded, yeah, they've got a right to it, and it could be canceled for, you know, if they fail to explore or if they fail to use it or in some way that the lease requires. But you know, basically they've purchased a lease. It gives them some legal rights. It is an entitlement, and either they surrender it willingly, they sell it to a third party, or it's taken back by the government, in which case the government would probably have to pay them compensation. So they're done deals, but they are reversible. It might cost some money. But you know, if we can waste $1.5 billion on a pipeline that's not even going to get built, there's probably money to be found for something useful. Sorry, were you looking for more questions?
There's so many here. We're just trying to, we want everyone to know too. If we're not going to get to everyone's question, but Lauren is collecting them all, and we're going to throw them at Kevin.
Oh my God.
He's got something to do this weekend, you know.
There we go.
So yeah, and then we can just you know, make sure that, and a lot of them I'm sure can be summarized. So here's one here. Dave's gonna.
Actually, I think two people have raised the question about what about beavers in the Headwaters region, and I think the other one was about like how will they be affected by, you know, selenium and the pollutants.
So beavers are remarkable little guys. They don't like moving water, so they always try and stop it. And they build these little dams. And actually, when you look at a lot of these headwater valleys, if you look at them in terms of geomorphology, you can actually see that many of those valleys were actually built by beavers over the past 10 to 12,000 years, building dams repeatedly up and down the valley, because every time they build a dam, they trap any runoff silt, and they build these big flat floodplains, and the floodplains of course store a lot of water. So beavers are actually a huge resource, a huge asset when it comes to keeping watersheds healthy and well watered. They hold back water and they move it into the ground, and they do it all for free, which is one of the things that makes them quite attractive, because it costs a lot of money to get people to do these things. In terms of their importance, well, a lot of those valleys used to have beavers and don't. It'd probably do more for our future economy to actually repopulate those valleys with beavers than it would to strip mine their headwaters. I don't think that the selenium issue touches on beavers too much. I mean, they eat vegetation. The vegetation is not something that usually accumulates selenium. Selenium is more of a problem. It bioaccumulates through the food chain. So it gets into invertebrates and fish, and then fish get eaten by birds and otters and mink and things like that, and bears. And so that's how it moves up through the food chain. And it's every step of the way through the food chain that it becomes potentially a problem. It's primarily a problem at the bottom ends with fish. But it can be a problem with livestock and chickens and things like that, where we raise them up in the plains. So it's a funny mineral, because in small concentrations you actually need it, but as larger concentration it becomes very damaging. beavers aren't really influenced too much by this coal mine situation, except that if they produce a whole lot of flashy, floody, eroding drainages, that will wash out beaver dams and undo all the good the beavers are trying to do down there.
Thanks, Kevin. There's been another couple of questions about the role of the farmers in the irrigation board and the Prairie Province's water board. Have they organized around the issue of this water yet?
I'm not really sure of where those different organizations are at. I know that the ranching community has been very involved because ranchers are used to, first of all, good stewardship of the landscape, and secondly, a critical dependence on good quality water. And so they're offended on the one hand that this would even be considered, and worried on the other hand that this is going to affect their water supplies. If I were in the irrigation industry of Alberta, I'd be really worried, because they live at the mercy of their markets, and people that buy food are becoming increasingly fussy about looking for organic food, looking for certainty that the things that they buy and put into their children's mouths are wholesome and healthy. And I would not want to be a livestock producer, a meat producer, somebody marketing specialty crops or agri-foods, facing a headline in the Globe and Mail saying that selenium had been found in my product. I don't know what that would do for your market access, but I don't think it would really improve it. So we have a very robust and healthy economy in Prairie Canada that employs an awful lot of people, and opening up their headwaters to coal puts a lot of that at risk, simply because once that selenium moves into the human food chain, our ability to market our goods to the world becomes an awful lot more compromised.
Okay, this next one I want to share. Here it is. This is from Margaret Moen. Thanks very much, Kevin. Your lifetime of effort is serving as a hugely important backstop for the province, and I hope people are beginning to appreciate that. And please take that in, Kevin. Right?
Thank you.
My question: how can we impart 10% of your wisdom into an empty head from Oakville? Question mark.
Well, that sounds rhetorical to me. I don't think I got an answer to that one.
We just thought we'd throw that one at you. Let's see. There's so many. What do you think, Dave?
I'm guessing this is Flora. Thank you for the presentation and the opportunity to join. Is the East Slopes policy from the 1970s the current resource policy?
The Eastern Slopes policy is still in effect unless the government revoked it today. You never know, they do those things pretty fast. And under the Eastern Slopes policy, mostly in the 1970s, early 80s, they developed a number of integrated resource plans. So the Eastern Slopes policy applies to the whole Eastern Slopes, and then their integrated resource plans were more area specific. And so they are also still in effect. And I guess that's one of the problems. They actually relied on the coal categories as part of what made them work. So I guess now that the coal policy is back in effect, we've sort of got a complete family of sort of policy tools. But at this point, until I guess there has been a subsequent thing that happened was that no, I think it was the Stelmach government. It was Ted Morton was the minister at the time. They passed the Alberta Land Stewardship Act, which said that we're going to do more planning. We're going to bring our plans up to date, and the plans that we come up with now will have quasi-regulatory power. They won't just be promises to the people of Alberta. They will actually have some regulatory clout. There's a South Saskatchewan regional plan now, and under it, there's a Livingstone Porcupine Hills sub-regional plan. And so the Eastern Slopes policy will be in effect until those all those regional plans and sub-regional plans have been rolled out, but they haven't been. The government is going to offer us the option of being consulted on a new coal policy. My thinking is that we should not be talking about a new coal policy. We already have a coal policy. What we need to do is finish our land use planning, because once the land use plans are in place, we won't need the coal policy anymore, because it'll be rolled in, as well as those integrated resource plans, into these new sub-regional plans. And it'll be done in an integrated way with public consultation, with First Nations engagement. It'll have been done right. A quick email from the government with a bunch of little boxes to check off asking us about coal, in order for them to check off the box and say, yes, okay, we consulted with you, now we're going to go back and talk to the coal companies about where to build their mines. That's not good enough. I think what we need to say is, we have a land use framework that says we're going to have integrated resource plans. I mean, we're going to have sub-regional plans for each of these areas that have coal. Hire your staff back that you laid off, and let's get that back in the mill, and that'll actually serve our purpose.
Thanks, Kevin. I see a lot of, first of all, I mean, that's very similar to the Canadian Parks and Wilderness Society's ecosystem-based land use approach. That I know you have worked with those people, but I just want to bring it up for the audience that they're active in this arena, as Kevin described as well. There's a lot of comments again about like, what can we do? How do we stop the exploration? You might just want to repeat some of the things that you have said. If you.
Okay, and I see another couple of questions as well. In terms of action, probably your best bet is, if you're on social media, is to go to the Facebook page of either Albertans, no, this is a website, Albertans for a Coal-Free Southwest, which is got some really excellent work done by CPAWS and other groups on it. So that's just Google Albertans for a Coal-Free Southwest and you'll find it. Or go on Facebook to the Facebook page for Protect Our Mountains and Headwaters. It's a phenomenally huge page. It's got, I think, heck, last time I looked, it was approaching 30,000 people on it now. And it's another treasure trove. It's got lots of advice and lots of ways in which you can sort of join with others to do things. But write letters to your provincial politicians so they know that it's not, that they didn't get away with making us, they didn't get rid of us. We're still here and we're not happy yet. Sign the petition from the Niitsitapi water protectors. And do anything you can to make sure that the public conversation about this doesn't end. Letters to the editor, contributed editorials, whatever you're good at, if you can figure out a way to link it to coal and put it out in the public domain, it's all good. This is a great chance for creative effort by individuals and groups of individuals. Don't wait for somebody else to tell you what to do. Figure something out and do it. That's what I do.
Right. Well, and David Swan has spoke to this a fair bit too, as an MLA from Calgary. He's letter writing and phone calling. So, maybe we organize, if someone feels, really excited about this, we could get a group of people together and get, just start phone, I don't know what they call them, like phone bombs or whatever, where you just call, but we don't do it for one day. We identify a week.
Yeah. Yeah, so there's lots of things like that, and it's happening. All you need to do is look around. There's people that are already doing things that you can just tie into.
So you said you had another couple questions there, Kevin?
I saw some about selenium. Oh yeah, somebody wanted to know about the selenium in the Waterton River. Nothing to worry about, I think, down there. The Waterton River headwaters aren't in the coal area. I'd be much more concerned with the Crow's Nest, Old Man, potentially, possibly the Highwood, and certainly the North Saskatchewan.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, I believe, I saw the report that was just released on the McLeod River and the Leggett River up in the north. And those are two rivers that have been decimated by the selenium levels there.
Right. They've also had creeks there that have been blown out by accidental water releases from mines, and one of the biggest environmental disasters in Canada's history was on the Athabasca River when a slurry pond associated with a coal mine there failed a few years ago. So yeah, we've already got a track record of environmental damage. It doesn't make sense to keep adding to it, that's for sure.
So let's Kevin, why don't you pick a couple of questions, or one more question, maybe two more questions. If you see something, I'll give you a minute to scroll through that really.
And
there's a question from Jana So, and she wants to know how much mining pollution is typically released into rivers when the mining equivalent of settling ponds are in place. Do these mitigations make a difference? Well, I'm nowhere near technically expert enough to tell you how much pollution is typically released. What I can tell you is that probably the leading company in certainly in Canada for mitigating selenium pollution is Teck Resources, who have the big mines over on the BC side, because they have sunk millions of dollars into different kinds of treatment systems. And although they are the leading experts, they have never succeeded in doing it. They've been fined millions of dollars for failures, and they're still failing. In fact, there are communities there that are now looking for new water supplies because their groundwater is contaminated. So this is one of the problems with the Grassy Mountain mine and the mines that are imminent. We are being told that they have leading edge approaches to managing selenium. The problem is that the leading edge still pollutes, and some of the things they're talking about are unproven. So settling ponds don't really do the job, because what happens with settling ponds, the selenium doesn't settle out. It just goes into the groundwater. There are treatments that you can use where you've got use catalysts to try and precipitate the selenium out. But the one technology that Teck tried in that domain actually turned the selenium into a more toxic compound and killed a bunch of trout. So selenium at this point is an unsolved problem. And even though it's an unsolved problem, people still want to build more mines, which says that they don't really care about the solution to the problem, because they know that they'll be gone with their profits and we'll be stuck with it. And it's always worked before, so we should let them do it to us too. You wanted one more question?
Yeah. Hey, Kevin, I saw one that's a pretty interesting and you may be able to help us with. And that's, do you think the federal government is the most effective forum to stop coal mining, or I mean, of course, we still need to stay after the provincial government, but is haranguing the federal government a really good weapon as well?
Communicating with the federal government is really important. The federal government, we always think, we got this Alberta way of talking that there's us and the feds. No, it's not like that. We have a provincial government and we have a federal government. The federal government is our government too. They represent us too, and they serve us too. And they have responsibilities that supersede provincial responsibilities. For one thing, they're responsible to make sure that our constitutional obligation to respectful engagement and consultation and accommodation of Aboriginal interests are adhered to when it comes to issues related to land. And that was not done when the coal policy was revoked. That was not done when the coal policy was brought back in. The government just ignored those First Nations. And you can't do that. That's a federal responsibility. They should step in and make sure it happens. So we should tell them that. They're responsible for the Species at Risk Act, and the West Slope cutthroat trout, the bull trout, the grizzly bear, white bark, limber pine, those are all federally listed species which will be or are being affected by coal. They have to step in and protect those species. They're at risk. This is not the time to increase the risk to them. This is the time to try and recover them. So there's that. And then they also have obligations in terms of our international commitments for reducing greenhouse emissions. And of course, our coal, when it's mined for steel making, is shipped over to Asia and it's burned over there in their blast furnaces. So they are the ones that have to account for the carbon dioxide, but it's our coal. And if we're serious about trying to deal with climate change by reducing the carbon dioxide loading in the atmosphere, we shouldn't be playing mystery math and trying to sort of wash our hands like Pontius Pilate of the impacts of allowing an activity here that will lead to carbon pollution. So there are a number of reasons why the federal government has a role here. And the nice thing is that they don't really have much to lose in Alberta. The people with whom they are unpopular in Alberta aren't going to like them any better, no matter what they do. But there are people in Alberta that are looking for somebody to save us from this disaster, and they'll be kind of grateful. So politically, they're in a situation where maybe they're more likely to help us, but they need to hear from us first. They need to hear from Albertans saying, we are in Alberta, you are our federal government, you've got responsibilities, deal with them. Because if you don't deal with them, we're going to be inundated with coal mines because we have a government at the provincial level that isn't interested in really hearing from us.
Well, first of all, thanks so much, Kevin. As that our friend said, your wisdom is, if you could bottle it, that would be just tremendous. And we could sell it to the politician, not sell it, give it to the politician, inject it.
I'm almost finished with it.
Okay, thank you so much. Is there any other words that that you would like to say?
No, I just like to thank everybody for being here and for being so active in taking care of the things that we all love. This is our time, and we got to make the most of it. Those places depend on us, and thank you all for stepping up. And let's not ever turn our back on the things of value in this province, because if we turn our back, there are people that will take them from us. So thank you very much, and thank you very much, David and Amarin, for having put this on.
You're very, very welcome. And I want to share, when we were having a kind of practice run yesterday, Kevin had shared that his sister Margaret was going to be here, and brother Tom, and then some of the nieces, and he had said it's kind of like a family reunion, and you know, there's some deeper wisdom to that too. You know, it's just tapping in, and in this time where we can really feel disconnected in many ways, there's causes like this that can really connect us. And you know, this is just the beginning. So we really want to extend our deepest gratitude to you all for being here. And we will be sending up a follow-up email to everybody. It's really important that you follow us or accept our emails. And then we can really help get the ball rolling. You can be checking out our website. We'll have a page dedicated to this. And we'll also get as many of these questions answered for you as possible. So we'll just wrap up. And again, everyone, stay warm and stay healthy and stay engaged. And we'll hopefully see you. Our next event, Dave is going to be the speaker to that one about the Elbow River. So we'll have more information up for you on that as well. So thanks again, Kevin. It's just wonderful to connect with you. And yeah, so good night, everybody.
Good night. Thanks so much.